Hello everyone and welcome to Adam Sharp YouTube channel. And in this video, I want to go over environment object, which in iOS 17 and later is just known as environment, and some of the misconception about environment and some of the use cases for how to use environment. All right. Now, I've already published a very detailed article that you can find on adamsharp.com, and it's called Deep Dive into the Environment in SwiftUI. And I'm not going to go over all the article in this video because we're going to actually see some code, but I want to go over a couple of these images, all right, just so that you understand what environment object or environment in SwiftUI is. So let's consider this SwiftUI hierarchy. Maybe you have views and they have a specific hierarchy. You have obviously some sort of a root view, root screen at the top, which contains other views, and they also contain some other views. Now, environment allows you to share global state. Now, the word global, when people usually hear it for the first time, they equate it with singleton. But environment object is not really singleton because it's not really common for all of them. It really depends, or it's not a single object for the complete app. It really depends where you inject the object. So if I scroll down over here, you can see that if you have the environment object and the object is injected at the root, then all the other subviews, they can actually access that particular object and they can update the global state. But you don't always have to inject the environment at the root level. If you want, you can actually inject it anywhere you like, and that particular view will have access to that environment object, and also the subviews will have access to that. So if you have an environment object over here, let's say environment object, and it has some properties. So this view where we injected, this can handle it or this can access it, and all the other subviews of that view can access that environment object. And you can also have multiple environment objects or multiple environments. So let's say that if I have an environment object as a class called Doctor Store, I can inject it at one location, and I have a patient store, I can inject it at a different location. So this means that all of these views for the patient store will have access to the patient store, and for the doctor store, wherever the doctor store is injected, that particular thing plus their children have access to the doctor store. All right. So this is the main concept. Now, if you go back to React, by default, if React needs to do some sort of a global state, sometime back, they can use a Redux, which is a global state. So it's a kind of like a different library that you can download and use. React does have also use reducer and all that stuff. But if you want to use global state, you can use Redux. And that's what environment or environment object is kind of providing. It's allowing you to store the global state so that other nested views can access it directly, can update it directly. All right. So hopefully now you have an idea of what it means, what the global state means, and how it really depends on where you are injecting the global state. Now, we're going to start with our code, but I want to show the code when we were doing before iOS 17, before environment, when it was known as environment object. So I want to show you that first, and then we can move into iOS 17 and above, which allows you to create the global state using environment. So let's go to the code now. Okay, so I'm using a simple application, simple SwiftUI application. We haven't really written any code in this application yet. And if I want to use global state, then in, let's say, iOS 16 or below iOS 17, then I'll create something and I'll call it whatever I want. So I'm just going to call it store. And it has to be conforming to observable object. Now you might be wondering, hold on a second, can't you just use observation or observable? Yes, but that's iOS 17, right? We're only talking about, right now, we're only talking about less than iOS 17, so iOS 16, iOS 15, whatever. And in that, there was no observable macro. So you have to use the observable object protocol. So store is a class and is conforming to observable object. And let's just go ahead and add some sort of a property in there. And don't worry, we are going to look at observation library also. But I want to give you a little bit like how observable object and observable macro are a little bit different. So after we create the store, and this can be anything, but I'm just calling it store, it does have one property. So in this case, we only have the count property. So this is the global state. All right. This means that whoever can access the store, they can access the count property and they can also update the count property. But before I do that, I need to inject that. So for my content screen, I'm going to inject the environment object and I'll just inject the store. Obviously, I'm doing this in preview. If you're doing it in your real app, then you will have to inject it right over here in the content screen. All right. Now, how do I access the environment object inside over here? Well, I'll just use the environment object property wrapper, private var, store, and then the type, which is store. Again, store, just the name that I'm using. You can call it global state, whatever you want to call it, okay? All right, so now let's go ahead and add some vstack and display one of the properties of the store. So store.count. And we'll also have a button that can update the global state. So it can update this particular count. So it's pretty simple. If I press the increment button, you can see that the count is incrementing. That means the global state is getting changed because the count is getting updated. Now, one other thing that we can do is we can put a print changes line over here so that we know that when the body is getting reevaluated, then go ahead and print changes. All right. So print changes is more like a debugging, facility that is provided. And whenever the body is getting reevaluated or recomputed, then print changes, so this line is going to get called. And I'm using the word reevaluated and not re-render because just because your body is getting fired and the print changes is getting executed, that does not mean that all these different views are getting re-rendered. Because SwiftUI is going to look at the views, and from these views, it's going to only render the views that have actually changed, not all of them. So now if I go ahead and increment, you can see right there, it's telling us store has changed, store has changed, store has changed. Because every time I'm updating, I'm changing one of the values of the store, and store is changing. But by looking at this code over here, the only thing that relies or that depends on the store itself is the text view over here. So that's the view that will get re-rendered in those cases. All right. Now, when we're using observable object, another cool thing that you will notice, cool or not, but you will notice, is if you have separate views, like different views. So let me go ahead and create two different views, and you'll see that those views will not really be doing anything. There we go. I created a view called numberless view that also has access to the global observable object for the store. In the body, it only has the line to print the changes, and it just says that I am a number list view. The list or the light bulb view is the same thing. It has access to the same environment object. Print changes. The print changes is just there so that, whenever the body is re-evaluated or recomputed, we know that it has happened. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add these two views in the VStack. So basically these two views, which is the number list view and the light bulb view, they are both children of content screen. Now, one thing to note over here before I execute this is the number list view and the light bulb view. None of these views are using any of the property of the store. I mean, the only property of the store is count, but none of them is using any of the count property. See that? The body? I mean, they just have a reference to this store, which is the environment object, but if you look at their body, they're not really doing anything. I mean, they don't even have to re-render because they don't really have any dependency on any of the properties of store because they're not even using the property. Unlike the content screen, which is actually using the property of the store. So it does need to be re-rendered. But what happens if I save it? Okay, let's go ahead and there we go. I'm going to save it. So once I save it, obviously the content screen and everything gets re-rendered again or re-rendered for the first time. And you can see that right now it's rendering everything. So I'm going to delete that, start fresh. And now if I increment, so even though I'm incrementing, you can see that it says content screen store change, number list view store change, light bulb view store change. If I increment it again, it's doing it again. So basically every single time I increment this store property, the number list view and the light bulb view, it still goes there and it recomputes or re-evaluates the body. It's not really going to do any changes in the rendering because they're not using, none of them is using the count property, but they're still recomputing or re-evaluating, they're still looking at it. And by looking at it, there's a term called diffing, D-I-F-F-I-N-G. So basically what SwiftUI is doing is when this line gets executed, this means that SwiftUI is looking at the previous version of number list view and comparing it with the new version of the number list view. Now, since both versions are same, because number list view and the light bulb view don't really use any of the properties of the store, they're both the same. So the diffing results is nothing because they're exactly the same. So this means that number list view and the light bulb view, well, none of the elements or components or views in the body are getting re-rendered because they're the same thing. But they are getting recomputed. They are getting re-evaluated. So every time I click on increment button, they are getting re-evaluated. Now, in this case, re-evaluation is pretty fast because the body of the number list view and the light bulb view is really nothing there. But if these two were really big controls with a lot of other stuff going on, then it can get problematic. All right. Diffing is or recompute or re-evaluation or diffing, whatever you want to call it. It's a pretty fast process, but it really depends on the complexity of the view and their subviews and so on. So the diffing or the recomputation that is going on for the number list view and the light bulb view is completely useless right now because we know that we are not really doing anything in the body. All right. So the question now becomes like, okay, how can we stop doing that? All right. How can we stop the body from being recomputed? Well, one of the ways that you can stop it by getting recomputed is if you only pass the stuff that the number list view actually needs, then you can do that. Now, it will not have access to the global store then. This means that I can go ahead and say like something like that. I can replace it with count. And this means that now it has a dependency on the count, right? And I can say store.count. But obviously it's a little bit different because now the number list view have a dependency on count. Whenever the count changes, and only whenever the count changes, then this can actually do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to also go ahead and add another property over here, is on. There we go. And then you can add a dependency over here for is on also. I mean, obviously we're a little bit moving away from what we were trying to do, but this is how you can actually change these things, right? If you don't want certain controls or certain views to get re-evaluated because something in the environment has changed, then one of the ways that you can accommodate that is by only passing the things that they need. All right? And when you pass only the things that the view actually needs, which in this case is count, and the other case is on or off, then light bulb view is now dependent on is on, and if that property changes, then this is going to get called. And number list view is now dependent on the count, and only the count. So if the count gets changed, then the number list view is going to get re-evaluated and re-rendered, probably, all right, re-rendered. If it's doing something with the count, which right now it's not really doing it, but I can actually go ahead and change the code over here so it's printing the count, all right. Same thing with the light bulb view. I mean, we can go ahead and do something over here, like is on. So if it's on, then we can say on, and we can say off, else off. All right. So one of the things that you will note about this observable object, which was before iOS 17, is even if your child views are using environment object, but not really using the properties of that environment object, they were still getting recomputed. And looking at this, like looking at, you can see that we have the store over here, we have the number list view. If I go back to what we had before, like we go back to the environment object, I can just probably copy it from somewhere. There we go. Just for an example. And over here we can say store.count. That's coming from the global state. And over here we can say store.isOn. All right. So I'm just going back. I was trying to show you something, but now I'm going back again over here. There we go. All right. So now if I go ahead and increment it, see that? If I'm incrementing the count, meaning the global count, the value is changing, it's still diffing or re-evaluating content screen, which is fine because content screen is actually displaying the count. Number list view is also displaying the count, but it is also re-evaluating light bulb view. Light bulb view. No, light bulb view, why is it doing that? Because light bulb view has nothing to do with the count. It's dependent on is on. All right. So that's a problem that we faced when we were using observable object. All right. Even though those properties of the store were not being used, everyone who was using environment object, every view, they will still get re-evaluated. So what has changed now? What if we want to do, or what if we want to see what happens with observable? Well, for that case, I'm just going to go ahead and use observation. And you'll see that how we can update this to use observation. So in this case, our observable object will become observable macro. Publish properties we don't really need, so we're going to remove that. Environment over here will be a little bit different because now we can refer to the environment by saying the type of the environment, which will be store. There we go. And for the light bulb also, we're updating it to use the latest one, which means the observation framework in iOS 17 and above. Over here also we'll use the same thing. And the injection also looks a little bit different. So instead of using environment object, we use environment, and then we can actually inject the store or whatever is using the observable macro. So you can see that it's not really a lot of changes. I mean, yes, it does take some time to update this, but it's not too bad. All right. So having done these changes, let's go ahead and run the app and increment. Now this is quite interesting, right? Look at what is being displayed or what is being computed. Do you see something different as compared to when we were using observable object? If I'm incrementing the global state and I'm incrementing the count property in global state, which in this case is called store, then only the views that depends on the count property are getting re-evaluated and re-rendering some of the views in there. All right. So the light bulb view is actually missing in this case. Because light bulb view is saying, well, I don't really have anything to do with the count. I'm not even using the count. So there's no real reason for SwiftUI to even come to me for anything. Not even for diffing, reevaluation, recomputation, whatever. Don't even come to me. I'm not even using count. That's your problem. All right, deal with that. So that's the change that you will see when you're moving from observable object to observable. And that's a pretty big change because now we were doing some useless diffing with observable object, so that is all gone. All right. Now, if number list view decides that, well, I don't really want to display the count anymore. And if I increment, only content screen is the one that is getting re-evaluated and then getting re-rendering the text view. Because even the number list view does have a reference to the store, it decided that it no longer wants to print the count. So that is why it is hidden over here, or this is why this is not getting evaluated. So hopefully after watching this video, now you have a much better idea of how the environment actually works. And just because you have environment or access to the environment in many different views, that does not really mean that all those different views are going to get re-evaluated. With observable macro, if certain property of the store or the certain property of the observable is getting changed, then only the views that are using that property in their body will be, well, re-evaluated, and then part of the body will get re-rendered, the things that have actually changed. All right. So that's a good thing to note, because I talk to a lot of, and I read online, and I get a lot of questions where there's a lot of misconception about the use of environment and how it just re-renders everything. So just to clarify, I created this video. All right, so hopefully you have enjoyed it. Now, there's one other thing that I wanted to talk about, and it is quite time sensitive, because the biggest deal, the Black Friday deal, is here. If you go to awesomesharp.school, click on courses, you can see right here, it's pretty big, you can't miss it. The Black Friday sale is on, 50% off all courses. This is the biggest deal of the year. I'm not going to give 50% off ever. This is the only time you're going to get 50% off. And Black Friday 24, that's the code. The offer is valid till November 30th, so you only have maybe a few more days left. And make sure that you use that coupon to, and this only applies to the courses, so you can use it to purchase any course half off, which is a great deal. All right. And if I may make a suggestion, I'm currently working on this course. This is a really good course, and I just published a brand new section for this course, full stack e-commerce app development with SwiftUI, Node.js, and Postgres. And this is getting a pretty big course. I mean, it's already close to like 15 hours long, and I still have a long way to go. Look at this section. I just added this section, adding and displaying cart item. It's a pretty big section. See that? And then I have to do Stripe integration and all that stuff. But this is a really good course, and it's going to allow you to become a full stack developer. You're going to learn SwiftUI. You're going to create your own backend from scratch with the database, with Express.js. And the good thing is that once you learn about Express.js, you can jump onto Vapor, you can jump onto Flask, you can jump onto any kind of like a framework or backend framework you want, because they are kind of like all the same in the end. So check it out, azamsharp.school, and also make sure that you take advantage of this deal. Hey, guess what? If you want to make money, you can also go to earn money and get 70% commission, because this is the best time to get the commission, right? Because everybody will be buying these things, and my commission rate is the highest one in the industry, which is 70%. So if you go to azamsharp.school, you can find all of these things, but make sure that you understand that this is the biggest sale of the year, 50% off. I'm not going to give any other time. Use Black Friday 24. Thank you so much.